Hello everyone! So the other day I asked you what would you like to know, what topics of birth would you like me to discuss? So Irene M asks, I read today the experience of a woman that went through a very long labour. She was at some point offered a cesarean because she released her waters many hours before they were told. So she was told there was a risk of infection. Would that be so? Okay, so let's talk about that. Pre-rupture of membranes. So you might be told if your waters have gone before you go into labour that you have to be induced. 10% of women's waters break before they go into labour. So this is normal. Let's just give you some statistics to show you what we're actually talking about here. So 79% of women within 12 hours of their waters breaking, they will go into labour. And a whopping 95% of women will go into labour within 24 hours. And you can look at that more from a study called Middleton et al. And I think that was in 2017. So this is a fairly new concept of rushing women to be induced with prostaglandins or syntocinon, or as you call it in the States, Pitocin. They used to, many years ago, if you called and said your waters have gone but you haven't gone into labour, they'd probably say, well, just come back to us in 3 days if you haven't started labour. But they've made that even lower and lower. So they're now saying 12 hours in many trusts, in many hospitals. You'd think that would be based on evidence, but unfortunately you would be wrong. Unfortunately, there's no hefty evidence to say that an infection will occur, which is what they do worry about if you don't go into labour within 12 hours. Now, there is a Cochrane review that says there's a slight elevated risk of neonatal sepsis. I believe it's 2% risk and 1% risk for uterine infection or sepsis. But we have to unpick this study like we do with all studies. You have the right to look at the study in more detail. Just as a general guideline, when you're looking at studies to see if they hold water, we have to look, for example, where were the studies taking place? Where did they take place? Because if they're all hospital-based, we can't really understand physiological birth by looking at what happens in a hospital, because the environment itself is not conducive to a physiological birth. The amazing Beverly Beach always said to me, you can't understand the behaviour of birds by observing them in a zoo. And she'd be right. So watching a woman in her home environment would probably have a better understanding of studies with physiological birth rather than in hospital. In the Cochrane review, we can also pick apart some other things that could elevate the risk of sepsis. For example, an epidural can really elevate the risk of sepsis because it can increase yours and the baby's temperature. And also with an induced labour, syntocinon, or Pitocin as you call it in the States, can actually create lower blood glucose for the newborn. There were no difference in the APGAR scores for babies whose mothers went into labour straight away or whose mothers waited to go into labour naturally after their waters went. Also, we've got to consider antibiotics. They tend to say that we want to give you antibiotics if your waters are broken and you haven't gone into labour. Well, you have every right to ask them what the risks of antibiotics pose. So, for example, thrush in newborns, and all antibiotics, no matter when you take them, you have to look out for the benefits and the risks. What's personal for you at the time. I'd also urge you to go through the BRAIN acronym. So B stands for benefits, R stands for risks, A, alternatives, I, this is the most important one in my opinion, intuition, and N, what happens if you do nothing. You can even ask them what are the risks of antibiotics. See if they know the answer. You can also ask these questions before you're even due to go into labour. So you can write an email to the consultant midwife, CC and the chief executive, CC, and when push comes to shove, it might make them focus their brains a bit to know that they can take you seriously. I hope that answers your question. Please leave in the comments section anything else you would like to know about anything pregnancy related. Have a great day.